Hello, everybody. We're back. We're on our next section of Unit 7 and personality. And today we're going to be looking at the humanistic approach to personality. So write that down at the top, and I'm going to try to go as quickly as I can. Remember to please pause and write down. There's a lot of information, so please make sure that everything I say kind of stop and then write down. All right. So let's jump right in. Right at the beginning, I want you leave a little space so that you could write down what is the humanistic approach. And remember, this is that ring finger that it's all about. Humanism is all about you make the choice to you make your own choices. You have control of your life, free will and stuff like that. Okay, so that's kind of the same way that they view personality. All right. So with humanistic approach, first thing I want you to write down is that they're going to focus on the way people strive for self-determination and self-realization. Okay, it's all about the self. And for here, they're going to study people through their own self-reported experiences and feelings. Okay, so make sure to write that down. Now, we're going on to the next one, which is subtopic, and one of the main guys is going to be Abraham Maslow. So, and his was all about self-actualization is what influences your personality. So we saw this with theories of motivation, so he's back, but we're going to focus more on self-actualization as being kind of the goal for your personality. So first couple things you need to write down is that he believed that people are naturally good. Okay, so um, he also was focused on that motivated by this hierarchy of needs. That's what motivates people. All right. And then the next thing is that ultimately people are always seeking to be self-actualized. Okay. And what does that mean? So self-actualized means that, which is basically a process of fulfilling our potential and finding meaning and purpose beyond ourselves. Okay. Now, he believed it was an ongoing process, but it was rare to reach the end. Okay. And this is kind of like the controversy because he said it was quite rare to get to this point. People that are self actualized are going to be people that are secure in their sense of who they are. Their interests tend to be problem centered rather than self centered. Okay, it's more about solving problems, making a difference. They have deep relationships rather than superficial ones. And then self actualized adults tend to be likable, caring, they're affectionate with others. Okay, now here's a problem with his study is that, make sure to write this down too, is that he is only going to focus and he only studied people that were creative, were well established in the community, and he didn't look at people that might have had some other like mental illnesses. Like, how do you come from that? Okay. So that's Maslow's self-actualization theory of personality. Then we're going to go to the next guy, which is Carl Rogers. Carl Rogers is a really big deal. He is like, when you think of humanism, he's kind of your guy, your go-to guy. So he also agreed with Maslow and believed that people are innately good and that they're innately driven to reach their fullest potential. Okay. Um, so, very important, and make sure to write this down. So, he believed that people are naturally born good, and they're also born with their real self and ideal self as a perfectly working together. Okay, so he says you have this real self and an ideal self, and when you're born, like this is who you are, they're working together. Okay, now what is the real self? All right, the real self is the recognition and acceptance of your one's own natural self. Okay, perfect example of this would be toddlers. If you ever look at toddlers in the mirror interacting with each other or just playing or just like talking, they are, and he says, they are their authentic real self. Okay, and that's why I always tell you guys, like, who you were as a little kid, as a toddler, was really who you naturally really are. Okay. Now you have your ideal self, which this is what emerges as a result of interactions with significant people in your life. Okay. And especially your caregivers, parents, right, grandparents, and so forth. So he says that your real self, right, this is who we really are, and then our ideal self starts changing because our interaction with the environment. Now, he has this thing called the unconditioned positive regard. Okay, you're gonna see this a couple other times in the next unit. It's a conditional positive regard, and he expects parents to have this for their child. And what does this mean is, and exactly what it unconditional positive regard is, that the acceptance of the person without regard to their behavior or like societal norms. Like who they are is what they're going to embrace and accept. Okay. And he says that, and make sure you pause all of that because this is important, that unconditional positive regard. He says that parents and caregivers should be focused on that unconditional positive regard. But it doesn't really always happen, right? Because social norms and expectations and so forth. So he says this is what leads to levels of conditions of worth. Okay, make sure to write that down, and I'll write this here so you have that. I can write it. So, conditions of worth. And it's basically what it means. Like, my worthiness depends on certain conditions. Okay. And these are the conditions, so write that down too, that separate the ideal self from the real self. I'm sorry. It separates the real self from the ideal self. So they start separating and becoming two different entities. um, the more separated they become, the more severe impact it has on the person's self concept, okay, and the images of themselves, which then this is where he says leads to dysfunction in their personality. Okay, make sure you got all that. Pause it, rewinds, whatever you need to do. There's a lot of information kind of packed in there, so please make sure that you understand that. If not, put a little star so we can review it in class. All right. Next thing under Carl Rogers is this word of self-concept. What does that mean? So self-concept is the central feature of personality. And this is where all the thoughts and feelings we have in response to the question of who am I? So that is you answering that, who am I? All of the answers to that and thoughts behind it is your self-concept. Now, if you have a positive self-concept, you tend to act and perceive the world in a positive light. If you have a negative self-concept, you tend to believe that you fall short of who your ideal self, okay? And you tend to feel dissatisfied or unhappy with your life or decisions and stuff like that, okay? Now, um, the goal always of the self-concept is to help others and then accept and be true to ourselves, okay? Now, he also has this thing called the person-centered perspective, okay? You're also going to see this in therapy when we talk about therapies, because there is a client-centered perspective, and they're using, obviously, the humanistic approach. So person-centered perspective is, these are three things that are needed in order to grow as an individual, okay, or to grow our self-concept. And so the first one is going to be called genuineness. And genuineness means, that's a E, by the way. Okay, genuineness means that people are genuine and open with their feelings. They're transparent and they're self-disclosing, right? They share their basically their authentic self. Okay. The next one is going to be acceptance. And acceptance is offering unconditional positive regard towards themselves, but also others, right? Accepting people, accepting themselves for who they are, as well as others around them. Okay. And they tend to be very like willing to share their mistakes and be like human, right? And be real. And then the last one is going to be empathy. And then this one is that they share and mirror feelings with others, as well as reflect on their meaning. Okay. And that's with that person centered. Now, let's talk about how do we assess humanistic theories and some problems that come with this theory and why there's so many other theories out there. So, how do you assess the humanistic? And it's all about self reporting. Okay. So, typically with this one, they're going to fill out questionnaires, they're going to evaluate their self concept, they're going to ask people to describe themselves. There's going to be interviews as well, conversations. So, it's always of how they self-report. Now, as you guys should probably be thinking, like that's a problem because we've learned this lovely little thing on in psychology about self-serving bias, right? So you might want to write that down. Self-serving bias is that we want for us to look better than, we're always gonna want to look better. So of course, many of these some of these questionnaires, there may be lying. They may lie, they may look themselves a little better, but these people really try to um, make these questions that you have to be honest. Okay, and there's like different ways of doing this, and we'll get to that when we go into trait theories. Now, here are some other problems. There's no empirical data or scientific observation that we could use. It's all self-reported, so again, anybody can lie. Sometimes the concept is really vague and it's difficult to assess. How do you assess self-actualized, right? Also, it tends to be overly optimistic about human nature. And then sometimes it's difficult. Here's the key. It's difficult to distinguish between a healthy pursuit of self-concept, or is it, narcissistic view of oneself. Okay. So that could be that some problems. I want to also start this new subtopic where it says culture and self, or self-esteem. Now, there are two different types, and this is kind of like where the problem is with humanistic, or where some cultures will not accept this, while others do. Like, if we're in a culture of individualism, we'll be more accepting of humanistic. Collectivism is a little bit more like, no. So let me explain a little bit. We've seen this before, but I'll explain it again. So individualism is giving priority to one's own goals over the group goal. Okay, so this is no subordinate goals over here. So this is, we take priority over our own goals, over everybody else. We define our own identity by our own personal attributes rather than the group identification. Okay. Next thing you need to know, they strive for personal control and individual achievements. Um, and then individualism tend to move easily in and out of social groups, jobs, place, because it's more all about myself. Okay. This can cause loneliness. There tends to be higher divorce rates, homicide rates, more stress related diseases. Okay. And if you haven't noticed, the United States, Western cultures tend to be more individualism. Okay. Then we have collectivism. And this one is a greater loss of identity, and the group identifies that your like identity is based on the group. Okay, so the group will have a sense of belonging, a set of values. There's also assurances of security, like we're all in this together. They have stable attachments to groups such as your family, clans, companies. Um, and like for instance, like China is very much collectivist society, Japan as well. Like everybody comes together as a group, like they're seen as one group. Okay. And that's seen more in Asian cultures of that collectivism. And that's it for this little section. I'll see you soon on the next one.